Welcome everybody to another Harvard-Brazil Dialogue Online, today on language development and parent-child interactions. My name is Tim Linden. I work at the Harvard David Rockefeller Center for Latin American Studies in the Brazil office in Sao Paulo. Since 2011, we've been working with the Núcleo Ciência pela Infância, which is a collective impact initiative that aims to leverage science to help improve child development outcomes throughout Brazil. We've been working with the Center on the Developing Child at Harvard, the Maria Cecilia Soto Vidigal Foundation here in Brazil, INSPER, the Medical School of the University of Sao Paulo, as well as Bernard Van Leer Foundation in Portuguese. Today we're very happy to have with us Mariana Luz as our moderator. Mariana is the CEO of the Maria Cecilia Soto Vidigal Foundation. She's also a World Economic Forum Young Global Leader. Prior to her current position, she was president of the Embraer Foundation in the US and of the Embraer Institute in Brazil, and was institutional director at the Brazilian Center for International Relations. Before passing it over to Mariana, I'd just like to remind everybody that questions can be sent throughout this webinar through the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And Mariana will do her best to try to incorporate as many of the questions as possible into the discussion. So now I'll hand it over to Mariana to introduce our topic and our speakers.
Thank you, Tim, and thanks for the invitation and for all the partnership within CPI. It's great to be here. Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming and for being with us for this exciting conversation. As Tim said, I run Maria Cecilia Foundation, Soto Vidigal Foundation, and we're a fully focused foundation on the early years. We've been around for over 50 years, but for the past 13, we invest 100% in early childhood development and looking at 4 main goals of how we qualify the early education, the parenting for all, but also evaluating these 2 aspects of the field, and then also communications. How do we make sure that everybody knows that whatever we live in the early years have such a greater impact throughout this individual's life, but also society in general. So as you can see, the issues that we're going to cover in our conversation today are very close to our home. So we believe this is a great opportunity for us to learn, to exchange, to build on possible ways on how we can move forward in our field with all of these critical issues for our society. We are also living under critical times, and we want to acknowledge that COVID-19 is here, changing our world, our daily lives, but also the early childhood development field. And even though we need to keep positive, we know it's hard, but it's important for us to consider that there's such a consciousness, unprecedented consciousness and sense of emergency to our field, that we as players and as people that are, in the front, we need to make sure that we take these forces and that we drive them in the right direction to make sure that we reach the most vulnerable and the ones in need, as I know that all of you out there and also our speakers here today care deeply about. So I'm sure the language and development and parent-child interaction conversation today will bring us many useful insights in that front. It is, an honor that I have the guests Flavio and Meredith here with us today. They'll both make a short presentation and we'll go for the Q&A. And obviously, I'd like to make a quick intro of our speakers and we'll jump into that. You can find their full bios in the websites for this dialogue, but also of their respective universities. So Flavio Cunha is a professor of economics at Rice University. He is a founding faculty affiliate of the Texas Policy Lab, a research center devoted to promoting innovation in public policy. His recent research in early childhood focuses on designing and evaluating parenting interventions, as well as training programs for the labor force in the early care and education sectors. So we look forward to hearing from you, Flavio. And Meredith Rowe is a professor of early learning and development at Harvard Graduate School of Education. She leads a research program on understanding the role of parent and family factors in children's early language and cognitive development. She is mostly interested in uncovering how children's early environments contribute to language development and applying this knowledge to development of intervention strategy for low-income families. So also something we want to talk about. So let's wait no further to begin. I'm gonna ask Meredith to start, and please, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. I'm Meredith Rowe. Thanks, Mariana, for the introduction, and Tim and everybody for organizing. It's really great to be here. I'm going to talk for just about 10 minutes, looking forward to sharing some of my work with you related to this topic of language development and parent-child interactions. Okay. Oops, sorry. Okay, I want to start though by sort of highlighting the larger educational problem that my work is really motivated to try to solve. And that is the issue of the income achievement gap in reading. And here, these are data from the United States, but the situation is pretty similar in Brazil and other countries that have such large income disparities. And basically what we see, what I want to highlight here is these are reading scores for children from the different socioeconomic quintiles in different colors. And what you can see is that when children enter kindergarten, and so in the US, that's when they're 5 years old and they start primary school, there's a large gap already in their reading scores from the higher end versus lower socioeconomic backgrounds. And the other thing you can notice based on this data is that the gap doesn't really get much smaller across the school years, right? So what this highlights is that this income achievement gap in reading grows most during the first 5 years when children aren't even in school yet, and then it remains relatively large. So of course we have many, many programs in schools to try to reduce these gaps, but what this sort of says to me and where my work is focused is on understanding what's going on during those first 5 years to try to shrink those gaps before they become so large. So when we think about this issue in early childhood and we think about reading, we have to think about, well, what is reading in early childhood, right? Children don't really start school reading textbooks. And we know, we've learned a lot about this, and we learned that one of the primary early indicators of later reading success and school success more broadly is children's vocabulary, okay? So for example, this slide just sort of shows you a general finding in the literature that we have this large achievement gap between socioeconomic status and children's 4th grade reading comprehension, which is a very common measure of literacy skills and school success. And what we see is that the vocabulary size that children have when they get to kindergarten sort of explains that relationship, right? And so what this suggests, which is really important, is that if we can build children's vocabularies by the time they start school, regardless of their socioeconomic status, that should set them up to succeed for the literacy learning and school success more broadly. So my work has really been focused on understanding this early childhood period and on understanding the nature of this relationship between parent background and socioeconomic status and children's early vocabulary growth. Okay, so what do we know about this topic? Well, decades ago, Hart and Risley did a study that became pretty famous showing that what they called this 30 million word gap in how many words children hear, whether they're in higher and lower income families. So the idea is that they found in their small study that the higher income parents talked a lot more to their children, 30 million words more over the early childhood period than the lower income parents. And that this translated into different trajectories of language development for the children. So the message at this time was talk a lot to your children, right? It's really important, talk a lot, talk all the time. And that's what the message that came out in the press. But a lot of work has been done since this study. And so we've learned a lot more about the nature of the home environment and the types of interactions that really promote learning in young children. So as an example, if you take this pie chart and you think of this circle here as all the variation in young children when they arrive at school in their vocabulary size. How do we explain this variability, right? Well, what we know now is if you look at parent-child interactions in the home environment during the early years, it's the quality of those interactions that explains most of the variation, not the quantity. So that little green slice is the quantity, the part that Hart and Risley were emphasizing. But really, it's the quality, it's the nature of the interactions that plays a stronger role. Okay, so what does quality mean? That's kind of vague, right? Well, one way to sort of sum it up, what we've really come to in the field, is this focus on conversations. So basically, it's this difference between engaging the child in a back and forth conversation versus just talking and talking or having speech around the child and not having the child be part of it. So a lot of people have been studying conversations because we've learned that it's such a powerful experience for young kids. And so this is the examples of one of our studies recently by my former student, Rachel Romeo. And she found basically that it was the number of conversational turns in the home. And so that's a term we use to mean the back and forths that related very strongly to children's language skills. And that this relationship was explained by the children's brain processing when they listen to language. So basically what this suggests is that engaging in conversations at home helps children process the language that they're hearing, which then helps build their language skills. And what was interesting about this study is that these were all lower income 4-year-olds in the Boston area, but it wasn't the amount of talk they heard that made a difference, and it wasn't the amount that they spoke. It was the back and forth. So there's something, language is a very social experience. Language learning is a social process, and that socialness is a big part of it. Okay, so I want to tell you just a little bit about what we've learned about what these conversations look like over development, right? Because we need to think about early childhood as sort of a long period, right? From birth to age 5. And a conversation, I bet you can imagine, with a little baby like here on the screen would not look or sound the same as a conversation with a 4-year-old over here on the right-hand side. So we've learned a lot about the types of interactions that promote learning in children of different ages over the early childhood period. Now, one thing that it says here across the top that we know is helpful at all these ages is caregivers who are responsive, who produce contingent talk, so like on the topic that the child is focused on, and that they have a fluid and connected communication. And basically that is just the definition of a conversation, right? But when we get into this a little further, we can look at, well, what does that mean for a 1-year-old? Or what does that mean for a 3-year-old or 5-year-old? And so what we've learned, just to highlight, is that with babies, with infants, the type of talk and conversations that's the most helpful for them is when parents are repeating words and when you're talking about what we call the here and now. So what is basically right in front of the child. So infants, 1-year-olds, they learn the most when you talk to them about what they can see right in front of them. And if you point at things and label them, right, that's how they learn based on their cognitive skills at that age. When children get a little bit older, toddlers, for example, you can keep them in conversations by asking questions, and because they can actually answer. You can ask, where's the doggy? And they can point to the picture in the book, or you can say, what's that? And they can say cow. And you can use more diverse and sophisticated vocabulary because kids at this age can handle it, and it's actually really helpful. And then with slightly older children in the preschool years, we can see that decontextualized talk. So here, this is a long word, but all it really means is talk that is more abstract and not in the here and now. So it's in the there and then. So talk about the past or talk about the future or explanations about how things in the world work. That's the most interesting and helpful type of talk you can engage in with preschool children. And that type of talk also tends to involve more words and more syntactic complexity on the part of the speaker, which we know is really helpful. So this is just an overview of what we've learned from our work and the work of others about the types of interactions in home that are helpful for children. And so what we've done in my lab, in my work, is we've tried to translate this for parents into little interventions that focus that are sort of designed for parents of different ages. So for the parents of preschoolers, we focus on the decontextualized talk. For the parents of 1-year-olds, we focus on the gesture and talking about the here and now. And the reason we're targeting parents is because one thing that we've learned, just to highlight quickly, is that parents' knowledge about these topics actually makes a really big difference. So for example, we've conducted a bunch of research looking at the socioeconomic differences in parent input. So the fact that parents from different socioeconomic backgrounds talk in different ways with their children. And one of the factors that's sort of a malleable factor that we found makes a difference is parents' knowledge and their beliefs about child development and their mindset. So just for example, parents who know more about child development and parents who think that they can make a difference in their child's development tend to be the parents who use language at home that promotes learning. And so the idea here is that if we can give parents that knowledge and provide them with that information, then it doesn't really matter what the socioeconomic status is or the education level, as long as we can present the information in an understandable way, then they could take that information and know more about what their children are capable of and about how they can influence their children's learning going forward. So that's what we try to do in our work. And just an example, a quick example of one intervention. So here we wanted to focus on parents of preschoolers. This is work led by my former student, Katie Leach. And so we took all that research on decontextualized language and translated it into what we called ready talk. Right? So here we said to parents, okay, so your talk is a great way to get your child ready for kindergarten. These are parents of 4-year-olds who are going to go to kindergarten next year. And we made it, we always make these interventions as videos that we show to parents in a home visiting setting. But here what we do is each letter of ready in English, we translated into a type of talk that the parents would understand because they are already engage in this type of talk with their children. So it's not learning something new, it's just understanding that what you're already doing is helpful. So the R in ready stands for recall past events. So all that means is talk to your children about stuff that you've done together in the past. You know, you went to the park last week or to grandmother's house or even a book you read or a show you watched. Just talk about things that you've done together in the past. And we know that that's really helpful for learning for preschool age children. The E is explain unfamiliar words and concepts. So providing explanations about how things work in the world. The A is asking questions, particularly open-ended questions that require the child to provide a verbal answer. And the D, is discuss future events. So talking about the future, what might happen, helps children learn language and also think about planning skills. And then the Y is a sort of mindset efficacy piece. You can make a difference in your child's future academic success. So helping the parent understand that the way they interact with the child really makes a large difference in that child's learning during early childhood. So this is an example of the types of information that we give to parents. And in this particular intervention, it was a 15-minute video that has examples of parent-child interaction embedded in it so that they can see what these conversations look like. And then just some quick results. Basically, that particular intervention, we did a pilot study with middle-class families. And we found that the families that participated in the intervention, we had them record their meal times before and after the intervention at different time points. And basically the intervention itself, just participating in it and learning about this information for the parents, resulted in more turn taking for the intervention group, and also more turn taking with this type of talk that we were explaining to them. So talk about the past, asking questions, etc. So it seemed like this population of parents really got it. They understood what we were saying, and they increased in these types of talk and also in their conversations, which is what we're after. And so what you can see about this is we only worked with the parents, but what's exciting is that the children just went along with them. They're able to participate in the conversations, and the back and forth turns are increasing, which is what we're hoping for. Okay, so just to conclude, all of this work, what we've been finding is that if we want to try to reduce these income achievement gaps in vocabulary and reading, There's a few important ways that we're addressing this. First, it's important to understand that these disparities appear early, right? And that they're due, at least in part, to children's conversational experiences at home. The approach we've been taking is to try to target some of these specific experiences by providing parents with information in the hope that that might help reduce SES-related gaps in early language development. And then the challenge, of course, is figuring out whom these interventions might work for and why they work for some people and not others, and how to do this at scale. And that's something we're thinking a lot about now, just given this COVID-19 situation. Our interventions are videos, but we've always done them in a home visiting situation where you have more contact with the families, but we're thinking now about how to do this perhaps virtually. Okay, so thank you. I think I'll stop there. And again, I'm happy to answer any questions and engage in conversation as we go along. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Meredith. It's been very interesting. Actually, one of our campaigns at the foundation on the communication target, it's a conversation can change the world. And we're actually working on that a lot. And we can talk about one specific intervention later on our conversation. There are a couple of questions coming in already, but I think I'm going to jump to Flavio, and then we can address questions, some to both of you at the same time. All right?
Sounds great. Thank you.
Please.
Can people see my screen? Yeah. Okay. So thank you for the Harvard team for organizing this event. It's an honor to be here. I'm going to thank Mariana for a nice introduction and all the work that the foundation does in Brazil on early childhood development. It really is very important. I'm going to thank Meredith for being an inspiration for all that I do in early language development. Your work really is fantastic. Thank you so much for devoting to this issue. I'm going to, sorry, I don't know what's going on here with my presentation. It seems that it wants to go to the end. Maybe I should stop right now. But a lot of my research nowadays truly is about trying to promote innovation in public policy, especially in human capital formation, early childhood and adolescence. I'll talk a little bit about how I got there. But from the point of view of an economist, sorry, I don't know why it's jumping ahead so fast. But from the point of view of an economist, one of the reasons, one of the reasons why it's so important for us to think about early childhood development is because of the consequences for future human capital accumulation. Meredith gave some impressive data on this issue, and I think that this is by now a settled issue. There are many researchers, and it's not an issue only in Brazil, it's also an issue in developing and developed countries. So this is an assessment on adult skills. So it's not early childhood skills. So to participate here, individuals had to be at least 25 years old. And it was both a literacy test and numeracy test. I'll focus on the literacy tests. And the literacy tests had three components. Component number one was a vocabulary test. And the vocabulary was just, I'm going to show you a picture. I'll give you 4 alternatives. Please choose the right alternative. Passage comprehension was really giving a paragraph and asking people to read the paragraph and answer questions about the interpretation of the paragraph. And sentencing processing really is just one sentence, and they had to actually say whether a sentence made logical sense or didn't make logical sense. When I was reading this paper here, I thought, oh, gee, I had to referee a lot of papers in which sentence processing was a key part of my job. And then you have different levels of literacy as determined by the results of these tests. Below level 1 is the most basic level of reading literacy. It means that if you ask people a very simple question, and the question is phrased in a way that exactly as it appears in the text, they can actually recognize it. So the sentence would be, his name is Flavio Cunha, and then the question would literally be, what is his name? So if they can't even understand that, they would be even below level 1. Okay, and then it goes all the way to level 5, which is the capacity to understand complex and technical texts that require coordination across many different pieces of information. And what we see, the real big difference that we see in terms of reading proficiency is not in terms of print vocabulary. Even reading words, recognizing words, even 90% of the individuals can actually do it. Their problem is when they actually have to infer meaning from the words that they are reading. So one thing is to be able to decode. This is what print vocabulary is doing. So if you see the word home, H-O-M-E, you can actually read that word. The problem arises when you actually can't understand why home is actually entering either the sentencing or the passage comprehension. And that goes a lot in the lines with Meredith was saying. I tell people I face this problem a lot. For example, when I have to read law contracts in Brazil. Law contracts, they have vocabulary that are completely not natural in my world. So it takes me a long time for me to actually be able to understand those texts. And that's because I don't actually have the legal vocabulary that is present in those contexts. The problem arises because the majority of the population faces problems not when they reach complex legal contracts. They face this problem when they see even very simple texts. And as Meredith said, a lot of this starts to happen really early on. So let me show to you a study that I've been doing for the last 8 years. It's the Philadelphia Human Development Study. It's 4 waves. It's now continuing with the folks at the Children's Hospital in Philadelphia. In wave 1, we assessed maternal beliefs about the importance of parent-child interaction for language development. It was not only language, it involved other components of development as well. We became interested in this around 2010, 2011. By then, I was trying to explain differences in investments in kids because of credit constraints. And then I read Hart and Risley. And words, you don't actually have to pay for words. And as a result, credit constraints couldn't explain a lot of the differences in investments that we see. I became really interested in maternal beliefs because I thought, what if parents don't know about child developmental processes? What happens then? I had for a few years worked on the econometrics of describing child developmental processes with mathematical equations and trying to identify the parameters that guide these mathematical equations. So we reformulated the problem in a way that could be totally comparable to the estimates that would come from objective data. And as a result, the numbers that I get by asking parents questions, I can compare to objective estimates about child developmental processes, equations that describe child developmental processes. And what we found was that low-income parents really had low beliefs. Here's the way to think about this. In objective data, if you double investments in the first 2 years of a child's life, the impact on child development 2 years later is going to be on the lowest is going to be 45% impact. The biggest is going to be something 75, like so as big as 75%. The median mom in this study in Philadelphia, she believed the median low-income mom, she believes that the impact is going to be 30%. 70% of the moms have beliefs below 20%. So that indicates really large differences between what we know scientifically to be the case of the importance of parent-child interaction and how much they actually believe is important. In wave 2, we measured investments in kids. All of these moms were first-time moms. So when the kids were 9 months old, there was no interaction with other kids in the household for most of the situations. And we found 2 things. We measured conversational terms, and we found that they talked too little to the kids. But really interesting is that beliefs predicted investment. The moms that believed that investments were really not important were the ones that actually were more likely to have low interaction with the kids. In wave 3, what we did was measure child development. And then we saw, using the Bailey scales of infant development, the low-income children lagged behind in language development. They were about 40% of a standard deviation below the norm for their ages. And then again, investment predicted language development. So conversational turns, the association was about 22%. The correlation was about 22%. Then wave 4 is when we actually did a random assignment to a language intervention. It's a large scale, well, it's now a program available in many parts of the United States. The name of the program is Lean A Start program. It's center-based, it's a center-based intervention. It's now being shifted to be all virtually done. So I think that there are challenges, but there are a lot of benefits from my experience with this program. It's a group of 12 to 15 parents. At the time that we did this program, the duration of the program lasted 13 weeks. Now, really lasts 10 weeks, which is crucial if you want to do this with schools. And I'll talk a little bit about these schools. The format of the sessions, they have components of brain and language development, but in our case, we really supplemented that a lot. And we're glad that we did it because parents arrived and they wanted to know two things. The first thing was the science of brain and language development. They were really curious about it. There was a component that we had videos with tips about how to improve parent-child language interaction. The videos were more to be used like an example of the types of interactions that parents could do at home. But what was really fascinating was to see that the parents started producing their own videos. And they started showing, oh, that thing that you told us to do, here's how we actually did it. And it was really nice to see that they were doing it and adapting it, and that they were not just copying it. And then there was a component that is the objective feedback that we told them. And the objective feedback is they wear this device that recorded the language environment and produced the statistics about language environment. And by session 4 or 5, they would come into the room and they would say, please just let me know, was I a good parent or a bad parent last week? So that's all that they wanted to know. And the objective feedback really is very simple. The way it works, it shows in the left column, what you see here in this left column are the last 8 weeks. And in the right column, what you see are hourly statistics. Top, adult words. Bottom, conversational turns. Middle, conversational turns. Bottom, the amount of TV or electronic sound that we see. And then this feedback really is based on the performance of the parent. So if the parents did well, they got a star. There was a bug in the code that produced the reports. It was not producing enough stars for all parents. I received 25 telephone calls on the first day that we issued this recording, and parents complaining that they should have gotten stars and they didn't. And that's when I realized that stars are a very powerful motivational tool for parents. And the way we see this is the way that the report, the feedback is it's totally concentrated on conversational turns. And then we see, oh, look at 4 p.m. You did really great at 4 p.m. You had lots of conversational turns at 4 p.m. You didn't have as many conversational turns at 11 a.m. What is it that you did at 4 p.m. that you could have done at 11 a.m.? And this conversation allows us to learn a lot about the nature of these children. So for example, sometimes they'll say, oh no, my child takes a nap at 11 a.m. I wouldn't be able to do it, but maybe I could do more at 2 p.m. or more at 10 a.m. and so on and so forth. And by identifying locations in which they're not talking so much and asking them, let's try to raise 1 hour of the day at a time, we actually had really very large impact of this program. So there are 2 ways that you can do it. If I tell you the conservative estimate that we have, conversational turns, the difference between control and treatment group, which doesn't exist in the baseline, it increases by 150 conversational turns. In baseline, they speak about 300 conversation turns per 12 hours of the day. So that's a 50% increase in the number of conversational turns. There's a less conservative estimate, and then this is over 80% of an impact in terms of conversational turns. And what we saw is that the mechanism that drives this change really is maternal beliefs. So they learned a lot more about the importance of language interaction and language development for the kids. I've been working with the school district in the region here in Houston for the last 5 years, helping them design a menu of early childhood programs, and then helping them evaluate as well. So 2 years ago, they asked me, we have all these problems with kids not being able to read. What can we do? And then I said, well, why don't we actually measure the quality of the language environment that they have? So we had a sample of about 500 kids in the neighborhood. It's a small school district in Houston. And what we saw really was very telling. 20% of the kids had above average conversational turns. But really, really high conversation turns didn't even reach 2% of the sample. So most of the sample 80% of the sample had conversational turns below average. And not surprising, we came back a year later. And what we showed to the district was, look at the kids that actually had very low conversational turns. If we just do a screening, simply screening, sorry about my dog, she gets very excited about this picture here. So she has comments about this. But the way this actually happened is 60% of the kids with very low conversational turns during the day, they actually were delayed in the bracket by the time that they were entering pre-K. If you go all the way to level 5, which less than 2% of the sample was, then 14% of them were actually delayed in terms of the bracket. So I think that this is 1 year later. And by the way, I love the Lena device, but one of the biggest problems is that conversations fluctuate a lot day by day. My sense is that if we actually had done this recording for 3 or 4 days, an average over 3 or 4 days, what you would see is an even more stark relationship between school readiness and the level of conversational turns at home. So now we, in the last year, for 1.5 years, what we're going to do is we're going to work with the district to implement the Lean Start program. So we're going to transfer our know-how from the Texas Policy Lab to the school district. And there are several advantages of doing this. One is that school districts have long-term relationships with their communities. And what we found is that for them to recruit for this type of program is much easier than it is for Flavio and the rest of the team to recruit for this type of program. They have stable physical, financial, and human resources. In the state of Texas, if the program is evidence-based, then they receive transfers from the state to do programs with parents in the community. And from the research point of view, what really makes a difference is that we have access to administrative data, so we will be able to stay and follow these kids for as long as they are in the state of Texas. They don't even need to be only in the school district. The challenges is that what we are finding is that the staff in the school, they actually have not read Meredith Rowe's paper, and I find that totally unacceptable, Meredith. And as a result, they have a hard time understanding brain and language development. And if they don't know brain and language development, they can't answer the questions that parents have about the science. And that's totally, and I would say that that's the most engaging part of the program. Parents, once they know about the science, they have lots of questions, but it requires someone with the training to do so. Hence, 1.5 years for them to be trained in language development and so on and so forth. A small aspect is that it takes a lot of time for them to learn how to use the technology. And we're seeing this right now in Brazil and the United States, in which teachers are having a hard time going to the online world because they are not really used to technology. So Meredith and I will, and Guilherme Irfi from the Universidade Federal do Ceará, and Daniel Santos from USP de Ribeirão Preto, will be doing some work together. We basically forced Meredith to go into this project with us, told her, oh, Meredith, will kidnap you if you don't actually agree to participate, and you're going to have to be to do it anyway. So she agreed, and our hope is to actually translate the research that she's been doing in the United States to realities of Brazil. But here's the sense in which we're going to try to do it: a scalable program, and by this I mean we're going to have to develop a program that fit the Centros de Referências de Assistências Sociais, or the OSCs that actually partner with the CRAS in early childhood. I think that there are several advantages again, because the CRAS in Brazil, they serve low-income parents of young children already. They have a location advantage. They are located in where these parents actually live. They have existing relationship with the communities, because as we know right now, the low-income parents need to use CRAS to actually that's their access to the government in many ways. And by designing something that can fit in a CRAS, then we can actually ensure scalability if it works. And we are really thinking carefully about some of the problems that we already see. Staff turnover is high. And then we are particularly worried about, after COVID-19, what's going to happen with funding for CRAS. My hope is that it has become very clear right now that the health sector in Brazil and the social assistance sector in Brazil, we need to invest in them, because they are the doors through which we're reaching people and serving people in this time of need. So I'll leave this last figure here, because this really is, just summarizes everything that we have been doing right now in terms of research for the public innovation, for innovation in public policy. I worry about debates that say we need to have large government or we need to have small government. I don't think that the answer is large or small from the point of view of an economist. These are choices that societies need to make. But what we should be striving for is for a government that actually has public policy that reflects the challenges of the time in which they are. And I think that this cannot be accomplished unless we have a much stronger participation or linkages between the research sector that exists in universities and the public policy sector is spread not only in the government institutions, but also the non-governmental institutions. I'll stop here. Happy to answer any questions. And again, I'll thank Harvard, Mariana, and Meredith.
Thank you, Flavio. I don't know if you guys noticed, but unfortunately my energy dropped here. So I'm back with my cell phone, which is working. So, but I did miss a little bit of your presentation. I apologize for that. That's great. I love the way and note you ended, because we may have, all the governments and all the policies and all the legal frameworks, but if they don't get to that child, if they don't reach that family, if they're not implemented, there is no use for them. That's the truth, and that's what we've been advocating for. So we need to make sure that we reach those most vulnerable ones. And I think that I will start with that. From all of the science and all of the we heard today, the early years have proven to be the better shot we have to tackle inequality, to bring more equity to the conversation, especially in a diverse society and in developing countries such as Brazil. I would love if you could comment that, and how do you see those interventions, and how are the findings of the researches that you've been developing have touched that or could be translated into that Brazilian context, to both of you?
Okay, I can start. Great question. The most important question probably. Well, I think there's a lot of things to consider. First is just the cultural nature of the context and how that may differ from the context where the intervention was actually developed. So in some of the previous work I did with collaborators in Brazil and Sao Paulo, Guilherme Blanzak worked with home visiting projects with teen mothers. And so what we did first there was to look at how the mothers and the children were interacting, right? To see if the interactions themselves were similar to what we see in low-income families here in the US. And they very much were, actually, which was promising, because it suggests that the interventions that we're doing, again, they're not teaching parents new things. They're just saying, hey, look, this is the type of you're already pointing when you're interacting with your babies, and it's actually really helpful, right? So I mentioned that we have interventions for different age, parents of different age children. So for that intervention, for the parents of infants with the pointing, they've been translating it there in Brazil and using it in one of the home visiting studies. So I think it's a process, though. You want to make sure that the information is relevant to the population, and then figure out how to convey it in a way that's comprehensible, but then also how to reach the parents, which in many ways right now is one of the biggest challenges. So I think, like Flavio was saying with the school districts, I mean, we need bigger partnerships with people that have access, you know, pediatricians maybe, or, you know, just who are the folks out there that are already interacting with the parents of children during early childhood, and how can we partner together to sort of get the information to the parents, I think is probably the best approach to do any of this at scale, or through the centers, like Flavio was saying. You know, we need to sort of think bigger than just, you know, I've always been doing this with my small samples of 50 families that I can recruit. It's very convenient, but we need to sort of get beyond that and think much bigger about how to reach people, I think.
So I completely agree, Meredith, that cultural adaptation is really important. It is, I would say, paramount, because part of the success really depends on speaking to the parent at a level that he or she can actually feel, how do I say, touched by it at a personal level. And I think that there are enough differences culturally between Brazil and the United States. They make sense. And even within Brazil, I would say that there are things that are important. There is a constant, which is the science, the scientific knowledge that we know, and a lot of it, you know, Meredith showed the Rowe paper that links it back to brain development. I think that that's very compelling evidence. That's clearly something that that the information needs to be translated in a way that is culturally sensitive. But the other aspect that worries me is the fact that we need the right type of communicator to do this as well. And it's not easy to do it. Looking back at what we did in Philadelphia, we were working within a hospital system. So we had access to people that had a lot of abilities in terms of marketing, let me call it marketing, but really is like selling the information to the parents. But they also had scientific knowledge about what was going on. And if we don't invest in the human capital force side of this aspect, I think that we are just reducing enormously the potential impact of these programs. I think that, you know, as everything, I never think that something is always one-sided. I've been thinking a lot about how to go virtually in some of the programs that we have. And one of the first things that came into my mind is that we're doing with the school district, we have a very extensive list of fidelity of implementation. And we were able to identify family liaisons, as we call them, the ones that deliver the program, in many different dimensions. Some of them are extremely charismatic, and they engage parents in ways that I wouldn't be able to engage them. Others are not as charismatic, but they have a better sense of what's going on in terms of the science. And what I've been telling the team is that, you know, maybe the virtual is going to be great if we can solve certain problems, because now one person will be able to reach 30 parents, 40 parents, but it's going to be a higher quality person. So it's going to be a higher quality experience for the parents, and hopefully it's going to also be a greater impact. But obviously, it requires that we solve the technological aspects. Parents have to have access to the technology. I don't think that that's going to be the difficult part in the United States or in Brazil. I think that we have enough telecommunications infrastructure in many locations in the United States and in Brazil that issue is not going to be an impediment. But the impediment is going to be having the label for having a program that is culturally sensitive to the realities of the location, and then having the labor force that can actually deliver it.
Great, thank you, Flavio. And I think that sometimes it's not just one thing because of the complexity of the context, which is you're just mentioning, and it's not just going to be one shot. We're going to need many solutions and different types of solutions and interventions to actually tackle from different angles and reach that greater mass that we all want. There's one solution, that an intervention that we the foundation has recently developed here in Brazil, which is called the WhatsApp Baby. I'm not sure you know of it, but it's been great, and it's been mentioned in the Q&A as well. So I'm happy to mention that. It's a WhatsApp profile, and it sends message to parents basically saying how to have better interactions and conversations and with their kids and during the early years, and a little bit of that translation of that science, how important it is and how it makes them smarter, but in a very simple, funny, and charismatic way, just like what you were saying. So, and as you know, WhatsApp has 94% penetration in Brazil. People really use it, and it's spread out everywhere, and the connectivity is very simple. So we've been experimenting that. We've launched it during the beginning of it was right when COVID started as well. So it was a coincidence, but it's been intensified in order to address the pandemic. And with that, I addressed the next question to the both of you, which is, what kind of other interventions such as those that we've recently created can be helpful, and how do you think that the context of the pandemic will change the interactions between children and parents as they're more at home, and how could we use that as an opportunity to actually improve that conversation, that language skilling, and building learning processes within the home environments?
Those are great questions. And nice to hear about the WhatsApp Baby. I wasn't aware of that. Sounds perfect timing and fabulous. I want to learn more. I don't have any answers. We're trying to adapt right now, obviously, to the COVID situation. I must say the thing I worry the most about, though, is that these disparities are just going to get larger with children at home. And I don't mean that in a negative way at all. I just mean if those home literacy environments stay the way they are for all children, some children are going to have a much larger advantage than others whenever they do get back to school. So I think it's really important to get information to parents during this time. And just like this WhatsApp, I think taking advantage of technology is obviously how we need to do it. Fortunately, I think Brazil is the same, where 98% of people have a mobile device. It's not like, so it's just figuring out how to get the information in a way that it's understandable. And so, we've been thinking like our intervention videos are videos, so they could be shared, just through links. But we're not quite sure that that's going to be enough support for the parent to understand, because we've done this before, sitting next to the parent and showing them the video on an iPad and making sure they're checking in and modeling and all of that. But I think it's a time to try it out and see what works and what doesn't work, because it can't hurt, I don't think, to try to give people the information if it might be useful to them. So again, I think we should think bigger, though, about how to maybe connect our information that we have with other projects or ongoing campaigns to reach people, right? Because that's the hardest part. I think just finding the people that would benefit from the information and being able to get it to them. Yeah.
So what worries me about this situation is really the uncertainty of when is this going to end. So this leads to a form of stress that is very different from the type of stress that one has to go through if they see, oh, this is going to last for a month, we're going to be okay. Right now, we don't know how long this is going to last, and we don't know what the world is going to be, once this ends. And I mean this in very mundane ways. Will I have my job, right? And what will I do? And I think that Meredith is right that this might have long-term consequences in terms of human capital formation, because of the fact that some of these kids are at a stage of their life cycle in which parts of the brain are plastic for language, they're plastic for executive functioning, and right now they're not getting the environment that they would need to get. So that's one thing that concerns me. Another thing that concerns me is how the stress affects parents and how the parents change behavior because of the stress. So they may not have as rich conversations as they would normally have. But what really concerns me the most is that in periods of economic stress, what the research, and this is research mostly in sociology, but I think it's really important to point that out. In periods of economic stress, child abuse and neglect tends to increase. And now, if we are going to think of programs, now that you guys, and I second what Meredith said about WhatsApp. I think it's great. Raquel and Paula had from the foundation had told me about it. I told them it's great. I think that right now you have a special connection with those parents. I would actually, start thinking about how to open up the channel to provide other forms of support. In the United States, there is a recent paper that was circulated about a month ago, showing that most cases of abuse and neglect that children suffer, they actually are reported by school systems, not by neighbors or and now kids are not going to schools, and as a result, what we have seen so far in states that have issued statistics is a 20 to 30% drop in reports. That doesn't mean that child abuse and neglect is going down. That just means that they're not going to school, and if anything, they may actually have increased. So, and again, that has long-term consequences, right? Because children who are abused and neglected by the parents, they have problems in terms of language development, but they have other problems in terms of social-emotional development as well. So I think that the challenge that I see right now is that any connection that we have with parents right now, we need to use it not only for the original purpose of that connection, but to expand and form support of other systems. Because children, I love talking about language. Language solved a lot of problems that I have had in terms of studying human capital. I can go on for 5 days telling people why you don't want to hear about it. But children have many dimensions of human capital. Language is a very important one, but they have many other dimensions. And we now have to think about how the situation affects all of the human capital formation in all the dimensions that they actually have.
Absolutely, Flavio. And I think that, we're very, we really reckon that. And can you hear me? Yes? Oh, okay. We really reckon that, and the role that it can actually play for us to also inform, the parents about that stress and how to take care of the babies, but also about themselves, right? How do we take care of ourselves as individuals in order to be available and to be there for that family and for that child? So definitely there's such an important role in that as well. I'm going to shift to one issue that is popping up a little bit on the Q&A here, and that's bilingual children and bilingual environments, and how has that played out in your research? Is if one language can be a predictor for reading and success in another language, if it helps, if it's a problem, how does your research give us a couple of answers on that, please?
I'll say a little bit. I mean, in these studies that we've done with these small samples, we've really limited the families to those who speak primarily English in the home, not entirely. But that's just more because we need to use assessments for the children that we feel are valid. And so it's been more of a methodological constraint. I do have colleagues doing similar work, for example, in Miami, with in the US context with Spanish-English bilinguals. And what we see in this field in general is that the role of input tends to be the same. It doesn't matter which language it's in. So, if you have and there's very, very strong correlations between children who, if they're growing up bilingual, if they hear more Spanish than English at home, their Spanish skills are greater, right, than their English. This is sort of what you would expect, but the data really do support this. And then one of the problems in the UX context is they get to school and the school's in English and they start to lose the Spanish a bit, and that can be a problem, you know, for families and whatnot to try to retain the native language. So I think that the content of our interventions in terms of the types of interactions that they're trying to support would be relevant for whichever language that we're targeting. And I would say, I mean, if we started in the Brazil context, I mean, I would hope that parents would just interact with their children and have conversations in the language that they're most comfortable in. Because during early childhood, we really just want to foster language development in one language, in two languages. You know, it's not, you want the child to engage in conversations. Like, I think one of the things that happens in the US context that's unfortunate is that pediatricians in cities like Miami tell parents to speak to their children in English because they know that that's what's going to happen in school. But then you have Spanish speaking parents who are not very fluent in English trying to talk to a child in a language they're not comfortable in. And that's not really helping anybody so much. So in our work, we think the best approach is to try to just encourage loving interactions where, and how is a parent going to engage a child in a conversation that they're not comfortable in? That's not going to be a useful experience, I don't think. So, especially in the early childhood period, you know, things change a little bit with siblings and once kids go to school and there's more exposure to different languages. But I think the key is to just focus on promoting high quality learning conversations in whatever language the family's most comfortable with.
So in our work here, A-Leaf is relatively small, but it has, I think that we counted 21 or 22 different languages. Okay, and it would make, so we offer everything in English and Spanish because those are the majority of the, those would be 90% of the population. Then number three would be Vietnamese, and we would love to develop a version of the program in Vietnamese. Not so easy because it's not only the language, it's also the cultural adaptation that Meredith has talked about. And then I think also Arabic. That would make that would cover a large segment of the Houston population. That would make sense for this program. We ask parents, what is your primary language? And then they go through the program in their primary language. And we tell them, use whatever language you feel more comfortable with your child. I had read already Erica Hof's research on language development of kids that have parents that's right. And that was very informative for us. But that's what we do in terms of bilingual kids. What's really fascinating is when we are doing the assessment with the kids, and some kids, you know, they have parents who speak Spanish, but they go to daycare, and then in the daycare they speak English, and then they may know numbers in Spanish but colors in English. So it's fascinating. So we have to accept answers whether they come in English or Spanish when we're doing the assessment with the kids.
Great. I'm going to ask one more question, and I'm going to turn it over to Tim and see how he wants to close it up. I'm unfortunately without energy here. I'm in the countryside of São Paulo, so I cannot charge my cell phone. So I also have a problem with that. So I might drop in the middle, and I apologize, but I'll go ahead and thank everybody for being here, all the participants and the speakers, and obviously Harvard and Tim for organizing and putting this together, and Morgan, who was working on the backstages. But the question, there's a lot of questions here on the Q&A about Ready, Meredith, and you know, what age the kids were, if you could talk a little bit more, the family context and the frequency, and just to that kind of intervention. But I'll extend the question, including Flavio as well, regarding the why of Ready, right? I really love the fact that, you know, you can empower the adults around those families and, you know, the responsible ones for those kids to actually believe that they can make a difference. And I think that that's the key factor that we have been having in for the challenges sometimes, because, you know, people don't feel like they have that power, but also sometimes that is the nudge that where we can have a conversation with vulnerable families, because I think that one of the most the biggest and the largest consensus that we have in families, no matter what social class they're in, is that they want a better lives for their kids. So if you can plug that why a factor to that responsible adult of a child, saying you can make that difference, and it's simple and doesn't cost money if you go in the conversations and language building skills, I think there's such an opportunity there. So I would love for the both of you, after Meredith answer some of the ready questions, interventions, go on that larger scope of the why. Thank you so much again.
Thank you, Mariana. Yes, I think I agree with you 100% about the why. In many ways, it's the most important part. If the parent doesn't understand that they can make such a difference, then why would they listen to the information about, it's really the starting point, I think, in many of the way we think about this work. So, I mean, for the ready intervention, I think that intervention is relevant for families with children 2.5 up to 5 or 6. I think we did the intervention with 4-year-olds. We've applied for some small funding now to try to do it online during this COVID time with lower income families. We did it with middle class families just to test it out. So to see if it works with a different population. It is a video, like I said, and I think 8 or 9 times in the video, we say that exact sentence. You can make a difference by interacting with your children in their language development and set them up to succeed. And the other thing that we emphasize is that you're already doing these things and they help, right? So I think that's a key part of it too. It's like, look at, you're already talking, all families that we've ever studied, high income, low income, different populations, all parents do talk with their children a little bit about things they've done together in the past. You have those conversations. Some parents have them a lot more than others, but parents might not know that that's actually helpful, right? So it's sort of like taking that approach, like, hey, look, you do this. We know you do this because we have the data, right? Like Flavio said with the feedback, and it's actually really helpful, by the way, and you can make a big difference if you do this more, kind of thing. So I think that sort of mindset or the efficacy piece is really, really important. And interestingly, in one of our studies with a different intervention on the pointing, we found that the intervention had a stronger effect for the families where the parents didn't have that mindset in the beginning. So it was sort of like just like the parents that already thought they could make a big difference were sort of already doing this stuff, but the families where they were like, oh, I can gesture with my baby and that's going to help. It almost, there was a stronger effect for those families. So I think in many ways that's promising. You don't have to change the people's mindsets entirely about the world, but just giving them little bits of information about how much of a difference they can make seems to at least work in our smaller studies. So I think that's promising.
I completely agree. One of the things that we found out is that most of the impact of the program comes not because parents initiate more conversations with the kids, it's because the type of answers that they give to kids once kids initiate a conversation is dramatically different between those that actually went through the program and the control group who didn't. So what's really interesting is child comes in, says something, then it's something about the answer. We don't listen to the tape, so to the recording, so we don't know. But what gets into is a lot more conversations. And it's not that they have more words per conversation. It's the same number of words per conversation, but a lot more conversation. So to me, the picture that I have is like, was one day, this is a true story. I mean, I was stuck in a railway station near Philadelphia. And it was snowing and the train was not coming. And it was 5 a.m. I had to return from a trip to Brazil. And there was me and this lady with 2 kids. And I had just read Hart and Risley. And this lady would engage in conversation with the kids in ways that I could not imagine more richer conversation. So I just came out to her and I asked, you have read Hart and Risley? And she says, no, I haven't. I don't know what you're talking about. But let me tell you, if I don't engage with my child in conversations, let me tell you what's going to happen. They're going to go into the men's restroom. I'm going to be, following one side of the railway station, another one. And one of the things that we actually did to parents is they are tremendously worried about discipline. And one of the components of discipline that we told them is, conversations can actually preempt some of the discipline problems that you're worried about. And we had videos and situations along those lines. So I completely agree. This notion of giving them the science, I had parents that actually cried when they saw some of the results in some of the papers that they saw. But I think that what really got them is this also notion that there was something that they were deeply interested in. And they were willing to actually try and see, will this work? And in the group sessions, what we saw is that, guys, I tried that. I tried actually engaging verbally with my child, and guess what happened? It was much easier managing the discipline problem, and that led to reinforcement. So I think beliefs really matter. But I think that we have to communicate to them in ways that they also benefit from it in tangible ways in terms of their relationship with the child.
May have, I think we lost Mariana. We're coming towards the end. There are a number of really good questions though, and I think a couple of them, tie together pretty well. So let me just throw a couple of them out there for both of you, and we can wrap up from there. So Renata is a pre-K teacher, and she's asking, can teachers in the schools be important communicators? Is there any guidelines for that? Obviously, I think the pandemic has some impact there, but one channel that was suggested to think about. There's an interesting question here from Sophia from United Way Brazil, asking a little bit about how can they be sure that they're causing behavior change in the interventions that they're promoting. Would you consider any specific contents or formats? And then related from Maria Rosario is a question about interventions that focus on a specific domain, such as language development, versus interventions that have a more holistic intervention, or they look at multiple different domains. She's asking your opinions about those different approaches.
I'll address the preschool question. I have read all the literature on the sort of preschool age interventions that are similar to the types of interventions we do with parents, because there's a lot of overlap there. And absolutely, I mean, all of our work is relevant to all caregivers, whether you're a child caregiver in a center-based program or a home-based program or a mother or a nanny. It's really just the adult that's interacting with the children. One thing we do see though in classroom settings, and one thing that we hope to see, is more opportunities for conversations. So often in preschools and elementary schools, the teacher is talking 75% of the time, and the children are talking the other 25% of the time, but that's 25 children. And you don't get that many opportunities for longer, more extended conversations in classroom settings. And there's a lot of interventions out there right now that are trying to do that. My colleague Catherine Snow has an intervention with 4th graders in Boston that really gets the children debating about topics that they care about. So you get that back and forth, right? We do know in preschool settings that a lot of the back and forth conversations between children and teachers that are really great happen in like the small centers in a preschool classroom. So if you have a preschool classroom set up where there's a certain time of day where the children split up and go to different areas, you might have one adult with 5 children in a science center. And that's where you see the really good sort of back and forth kinds of conversations. And also, of course, in the larger group setting, when teachers might read a book to the whole class, there are interventions for them to think about how to stop and ask the children questions and make predictions and all these kinds of things that are useful for learning. So a lot of this work, it's relevant for classroom settings as well. It's just a slightly different situation, obviously, because there's many more children than there are adults. and it's a little more challenging to sort of ensure that each child gets opportunities to engage in with language and using language every day.
And Meredith, is there any is there research on professional school, teachers that are then working with parents in terms of teaching the parents about language development and how they can best support their children's language development?
Yeah, I see ad hoc programs like that, but I don't know that we have a lot of, I don't know that that emphasis tends to be put on, in the US context, on the preschool teachers. Often like the preschools, if it's Head Start or other places, might be a place that disseminates information. And obviously, conversations between teachers and parents in general about how children are doing are extremely helpful. But I don't think in the US context that preschool teachers end up being necessarily the resource of information. But it's an interesting possibility. There's just so much variability in our preschool teachers and what they know and the approaches they take, that they're not necessarily the disseminators of knowledge themselves. I mean, it's really an issue with pre-service, education in terms of how we train early childhood educators more than anything else. But that could be one approach for sure.
Excellent. And Flavia, any final thoughts about any of those, the stream of questions?
So quickly, so just one thing about your last question. So there is a version of this program that I presented for child care providers. And what we're seeing is that low quality child care providers also tend to have low quality language environment. And again, this is very, very preliminary, but it shows that they could benefit from this program as well. We don't know if they are transferring the knowledge to the parents. That's another question. In the other program that I showed, we do know that the parent that was not invited to participate in the sessions, that parent also changed behavior, which leads me to one of the questions. How do we know that it's changing behavior? We have, so this is the part of the Philadelphia Human Development Study. So we followed these kids until they were, at that point, until they were about 28 months old. We got 30% of that sample, and then 15% of the sample went to the treatment group, randomly assigned, and 50% went to the control group. We had the intervention, and then at the end of the intervention, we measured behavior again. So we have behavior before the intervention for the control and the treatment group. We have random assignment between control and the treatment group, and we have behavior at the end of the program. So this is why we say, and our plan is to continue to measure behavior as the parents age and the kids age. I'll go to the last question from Maria Rosario, because that's a question I've been thinking a lot about. And my view about this is that the two things that we need to consider. One are the costs of the programs. So a holistic program might have actually much higher costs. That's one thing. And number two is we need to make prescriptions based on problems that people have. Not all low-income families will have language development, low language environment problems. So I wouldn't recommend any program that parents don't need for them to do it. So that would be the number one thing that I would recommend. So and the other thing is, in different stages of life cycle, people have different types of dimensions of human capital that they are forming. So I can imagine situations in which some children will have okay language environment. They'll not have an environment that is so good for the formation of executive functioning skills, in which case they would need an intervention for those parents to promote executive functioning skills. But I wouldn't do it when the kids are 1 year old. I would do it a little bit later. And the opposite is going to be true for language development as well. So my view is, let's address the problems that exist in parent-child relationships, and then let's do them with programs that attack specific problems, not that are open-ended. I think that open-ended programs, you might get difficulties getting parents interested in participating because some of the issues may not apply to them.
Yeah, and I'll just add, and then you have the problem of not knowing why you have a certain finding because you're doing too many things at once to isolate the actual effect.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Well, I think we've hit our time here. So I'd like to thank very much Mariana, who unfortunately is no longer with us. Meredith and Flavio, we're really excited also to follow in the coming years the new research project that you and others that you had mentioned are starting to work on. You know, we will, for all the participants, we'll do our best to share the recordings and share the resources that were referenced in a timely fashion. We will also let us know, follow us on social media if you're interested in future dialogues such as this. So thank you all very much and have a great afternoon.
Thank you.